Fi Nurgle-Corrupted's tank crew. I need to write this down while my fingers can still grip a stylus, while the parts of my brain that remember words remain distinct from the parts that have become something else. We were crew of the Indomitable, a Mark III battle tank in the 83rd Armorian Armored Regiment, and we served with distinction for 11 years across 7 war zones. I was Commander Voss Harkin. I commanded good soldiers. We followed our orders. We died doing our duty. But we did not die quickly, and we did not die cleanly. And I need someone to understand what happened in those 7 days after the green mist came down. The siege of Tertius Hive had ground on for 4 months when we received orders to push through the Rust Quarter. Intelligence reported the heretic forces were consolidating near the old Promethium refineries, preparing for a breakout toward the orbital elevator. Our company, 12 tanks, 8 still operational, formed the spearhead. I remember the briefing clearly because it was the last time everything was normal. The last time I looked at my crew and saw only the soldiers I'd served with for years instead of what they would become. Lieutenant Cross stood before the tactical display, his face illuminated by the green glow of the holith, and he told us the enemy had been pushed back, was desperate, was breaking. We believed him because we wanted to believe, because believing meant this nightmare might end soon. The Indomitable rolled out at 0600 hours. I can still recall the familiar rhythm of it, the way my body knew every vibration, every sound, the way I could sense the mood of the machine through the soles of my boots. Servo-loaded shells with his practiced efficiency. Dren kept the engine purring smooth. Macris tracked targets through the gunner's scope with her methodical precision, and young Poke monitored the Vox, his fingers dancing across the controls. We were a single organism, in the way that all tank crews become after years of shared combat. We moved as one. We thought as one. I did not realize how literal that would become. The Rust Quarter deserved its name. Decades of industrial decay had left the district a labyrinth of corroded metal and crumbling ferrocrete, where chemical runoff had stained everything in shades of orange and brown. The air tasted of oxidation even through our rebreather filters. We advanced in formation, turrets scanning every sense alert for ambush. The streets were too quiet. I should have recognized that silence for what it was, not absence of enemy, but anticipation of something worse than conventional resistance. But we were soldiers, trained to push forward, trained to trust in our armor and our guns and the Emperor's protection. The attack came at 0847 hours, but it was not las fire or rockets or any weapon we recognized. We had just crossed into the shadow of the old No. 7 refinery when the mortars began falling, except they did not explode. They burst open like overripe fruit, releasing clouds of green, yellow mist that rolled across the ground with unnatural density, clinging to surfaces, seeping into every gap and crack. I ordered the company to button up, sealed all hatches, switched to internal air. I thought we were safe. I thought our tank was sanctuary. Through the vision blocks, I watched the mist embrace the other tanks in our column, watched it slide along their armor like oil on water. Then I watched the crews begin to scream over the Vox. Not immediately. That came later, but their voices changed, became wet, confused. Something's wrong with the air scrubbers, one said. It smells sweet in here, said another. Like rotting flowers, said a third. Lieutenant Cross ordered full retreat, told us to withdraw to the fallback position, but 3 of the tanks did not respond. Their engines still ran, their treads still churned. But no one answered when we called their names. That was when I noticed the smell inside our own tank. Sweet, yes, like flowers, but flowers left too long in water, beginning to decay. It came through the ventilation system despite all our filters, despite the sealed hatches, despite every precaution. Poke looked up from his Vox station, his young face confused beneath his helmet. Commander, he said, do you smell that? And I did. Emperor help me, I did. It was not unpleasant, not at first. That was the horrible part. It smelled almost pleasant, almost inviting, like something you might encounter in a shrine garden or a remembrance chapel. I told myself it was residue, external contamination that would fade once we withdrew to clean air. We pulled back to checkpoint Ferris by 0930 hours, parked in the designated company area. But something was already wrong with my crew. Servo complained that his hands felt numb, said the loading mechanism seemed sticky, harder to work. Dren reported sluggish response from the engine controls, as though the Indomitable itself was fighting against his commands. Macris said the targeting cogitator was displaying strange symbols, shapes that did not match any language she knew. I ordered them to run full diagnostics while I reported to Lieutenant Cross, who stood beside his command tank looking at his remaining crews with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not fear, exactly, but something close to it, something uncertain. 7 tanks reported that smell, he told me quietly, away from the others. 7 tanks that were deepest in the mist. Yours was one of them. He paused, seemed to wrestle with his next words. There's a Medica team coming from the hive, should be here by 1400 hours. Until then, you stay buttoned up, understand? No one goes outside, no one breathes unfiltered air. And if anyone shows symptoms. He did not finish that sentence, just gripped my shoulder with the kind of pressure that said more than words could. I returned to the Indomitable and sealed us inside. The smell had grown stronger in my absence, thicker somehow, coating the inside of my throat when I breathed. My crew sat at their stations with the rigid stillness of soldiers waiting for an enemy they could not see, could not shoot, could not defeat with any weapon in our arsenal. I should have told them then what I suspected, what every soldier who has fought long enough learns to recognize. That certain smell, that sweet corruption, marked heretic weapons, marked chaos, marked things that should not exist but did. Instead, I told them we would wait for the Medica team, told them everything would be fine, told them the lies that commanders tell because the truth offers no comfort and no hope. The Medica team never came. At 13:22 hours, servos started screaming. Not words, just a high, terrible sound that filled the tank's interior until Dren slapped him across the face, once, twice, and he stopped. When I reached him, I saw why he had screamed. His left hand, the hand he used to load shells, the hand that had touched 10,000 rounds of ammunition in our years of service, was stuck to a shell casing. Not holding it. Stuck to it. The flesh of his palm had merged with the metal, skin and steel blending together in a way that made my mind reject what my eyes reported. He pulled at it, whimpering now instead of screaming, and threads of skin stretched between his hand and the shell like the web of some obscene spider. Don't, I told him, but it was too late. He yanked his hand free and left pieces of himself behind, pink meat and yellow fat clinging to the brass like some grotesque decoration. Blood welled up, but not the clean red blood of a normal wound. This was darker, thicker, and it smelled like the mist, that same sweet flower, rot smell that now permeated every cubic inch of our tank. Poke vomited into his helmet, and I did not blame him. Dren stared straight ahead at his controls, his jaw locked, his eyes very wide. Only Macris maintained her composure, though I saw her hands trembling as she tightened her grip on the targeting controls. What's happening to me? Servo asked, his voice very small, very young, though he was 32 and had survived battles that broke stronger men. Commander, what did they do to us? I had no answer that would help him, so I gave him the only thing I could, orders. Wrap the hand, Tate. We need to stop the bleeding. I turned to Polk. Get on the Vox. I don't care if you have to go through every channel. Find someone who can tell us what that mist was. To Dren's. Keep the engine running. We might need to move fast. To Macris. Monitor the perimeter. If anything approaches anything at all, you tell me immediately. They moved to obey, and I felt a small measure of relief that they could still function, still follow commands, still be soldiers. I did not know then that I was watching the last hours of their humanity, the final moments when they were still fully themselves and not yet the things they would become. The Vox produced only static and fragments, voices cutting in and out, though whether from atmospheric interference or something else I could not determine. Polk pressed his earpiece tighter, leaning into his station as though physical proximity might help him hear through the chaos. There's something, he said frowning. Underneath the static. It sounds like words, but I can't quite. He trailed off, adjusting frequencies, and I saw his expression change. Sir, I think someone's trying to reach us. It's very faint, but they're saying we need to evacuate, saying the contamination is spreading. Evacuation. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Evacuate the tank meant going outside, meant breathing the air, meant exposure to whatever had already gotten inside anyway. I considered the option for perhaps 3 seconds before I heard the sound that made the decision for me. Wet, tearing sounds from where Servo sat holding his wrapped hand, sounds like meat being pulled from bone. He was unwrapping the bandage, and when the fabric fell away, I saw that the wound had changed. The flesh around it had taken on a grey-green tint, and things were growing in it, small white nodules like tumors or fungi, pushing up through the skin from underneath. As I watched, one of them burst, releasing a puff of spores that glittered in the tank's interior lights before they settled on every surface, on every piece of equipment, on us. "Seal your rebreathers," I ordered. Too late. We had all breathed it in, all felt those spores enter our lungs and settle there like seeds in fertile soil. Poke, switch to emergency broadcast. Tell anyone listening we need immediate quarantine and medical assistance. Tell them. But I stopped because I did not know what to tell them, did not know what words could convey what was happening in the Indomitable's steel belly, did not know if quarantine would matter when the corruption was already inside us, already changing us, already making us into something new. Night came, though we could not see it through the sealed hatches. The tank's chronometer marked the hours with its steady digital progression, but time felt different now, stretched and distorted, as though we existed in some pocket of reality where normal rules no longer applied. The smell had changed again, grown thicker, more complex, developing undertones of earth and decay and something else, something almost spice, like that reminded me of incense in a chapel, of holy smoke and sacred oils. It made no sense that corruption should smell like prayer, but sense had abandoned us somewhere around the time Servo's flesh began to grow those white nodules, which had spread now to his arm, up past his elbow, clusters of them pushing through his uniform like obscene flowers blooming in fast motion. He sat very still, watching them grow, and I realized he had stopped trying to pick them off or cut them away. Acceptance, perhaps, or shock, or the beginning of whatever mental transformation accompanied the physical. His eyes had changed color, I noticed. The whites were turning yellow, not jaundiced but crystalline like amber, beautiful and terrible. When he spoke, his voice carried a wet quality, as though his throat was filling with fluid, but his words remained clear, precise, almost pedantic in their careful articulation. "It doesn't hurt anymore," he said to no one in particular, to all of us, to himself. "At first it burned, felt like fire in my veins, but now it's comfortable, warm, like being wrapped in blankets on a cold night. Is that strange? Should it hurt more than this?" Yes, I wanted to tell him, yes, it should hurt. Pain is your body's warning system. Pain tells you something is wrong. But I said nothing because what comfort would truth bring him now? Instead I checked on the others. Dren still gripped his controls, but his knuckles had cracked and wept clear fluid that dried into crusty deposits on the steering levers. Macris's breathing had developed a rattle, a sound like ball bearings rolling in her chest, and Polk, young Polk, who had joined us only 8 months ago, barely trained, still writing letters to his mother on Agri, World Secundus. Polk's teeth were loose in his gums. I could see them shift when he spoke, could see the blood that painted his words red. I looked at my own hands and saw the first signs. My fingernails had thickened, taken on a greenish tint, and the skin around them was pulling back, receding, exposing pink flesh that wept clear fluid. The fluid smelled sweet, smelled like the mist, smelled like the infection that had colonized our bodies and was remaking us according to some disease template. I pressed my hands together, felt how warm they were, feverish, and noticed for the first time that I could feel the Indomitable through them, could sense the tank's systems the way one might sense one's own heartbeat. The engine's rhythm matched my pulse. The targeting cogitator's processing cycles synchronized with my thoughts. We were becoming connected, I realized, not just to each other, but to the machine we served, the metal shell that had been our protection and was now our prison. The second day brought worse transformations. I had ordered everyone to sleep in shifts, to maintain some semblance of routine and discipline, but sleep was difficult when every breath rattled with fluid. when every movement revealed new ways our bodies had betrayed us. Dren developed a cyst on his neck during the night, a bulbous growth the size of a child's fist that pulsed with visible fluid. When he tried to lance it with his combat knife, the blade stuck in his flesh, and when he pulled it free, the metal had corroded, pitted and stained as though exposed to years of acid rain. The cyst remained, growing larger, and by mid-morning it had begun to weep a yellow, green pus that stank of gangrene and honey. Macris's eyes clouded over, not with cataracts but with something that looked like mold, fine threads of white and grey spreading across her corneas. She insisted she could still see, could see better than before, actually, could perceive things that had been invisible. Heat signatures through solid metal, the electromagnetic pulse of the tank's systems, the life signs of her crewmates rendered in shades of sickness and transformation. She described Servo as bursting with new growth, so much life, so much potential, and Polk as changing quickly, bones softening, preparing for reshaping. When I asked what she saw when she looked at me, she smiled with lips that had split at the corners, exposing too much of her gums, and said, "You're becoming the Nexus, Commander. We're all growing toward you." I did not understand what she meant until I tried to give an order and actually felt it propagate through my crew like an electrical current. When I told Polk to try the Vox again, his hands moved before I finished speaking, responding to my will as though my thoughts had become his thoughts, as though the boundary between us had grown permeable. It should have terrified me. It did terrify me. But underneath the terror ran a current of something else, something I did not want to examine too closely. A sense of rightness, of completion. As though this merger was what we had been unconsciously working toward all along, as though the years of coordinated action had been preparation for this final integration. The Vox crackled and spat, producing nothing but static and those whispers underneath, the ones Polk had mentioned, which I could hear now too. They were not speaking Gothic, or if they were, it was Gothic transformed, words stretched and slurred until they became something else, something that bypassed language and spoke directly to the parts of the brain that processed fear and wonder and religious ecstasy. I found myself leaning closer to the Vox, trying to distinguish individual words from the susurrus of voices, and Polk said, very quietly, "They're calling to us, Commander. They know we're here. They want us to understand that we're not dying. We're being reborn. Turn it off," I ordered, but my voice lacked conviction, lacked authority, and Polk hesitated before complying. In that hesitation I recognized the first fracture in our command structure. The first moment when a crew member weighed my order against some other compulsion and found my authority wanting. It lasted only a second before he reached out and switched off the Vox, but that second changed everything. Proved that we were not merely suffering physical transformation, but psychological disintegration, the dissolution of the bonds that made us soldiers, that made us crew, that made us anything more than meat waiting to become something else. The third day Servo tried to load a shell, and could not. His arm had fused to the loading mechanism during the night, flesh growing into metal, nerves intertwining with wires, until it was impossible to determine where he ended and the tank began. He did not panic, did not scream as he had before. Instead he experimented with the fusion, learning how to operate the mechanism through direct connection rather than physical manipulation. Shells loaded faster now, smoother, with inhuman precision. He laughed when he realized what he could do, a wet, bubbling sound that was nothing like his normal laugh, and said, "This is actually better, easier. I don't have to think about it anymore. My body just knows what to do." I wanted to tell him that his body was no longer his body. That what he called improvement was corruption, was transformation into something that should not exist, but the words died in my throat because I was changing too, could feel it every moment now, could feel my spine lengthening, vertebrae separating and multiplying, giving me flexibility that human spines should not possess. My uniform had split down the back to accommodate this growth, and when I reached behind me to touch the exposed skin, I found it had hardened into something resembling shell or carapace, segmented and tough, warm to the touch with an internal heat that had nothing to do with fever and everything to do with the new biology establishing itself inside me. We were on the 4th day when the Indomitable started moving on its own. Small movements at first. The turret rotating a few degrees without input. The engine revving without Dren touching the controls. The ammunition feed cycling without servo's direction. I noticed it because I was attuned to the tank now. Could sense its systems the way I could sense my own body, and I felt it when those systems began operating according to their own agenda. The machine was waking up, developing something that might be called awareness, might be called volition, might be called hunger. It was not possessed in the traditional sense, not inhabited by some external entity but transformed, altered on a fundamental level until it became a hybrid of metal and flesh and whatever immaterial essence animated both. "Dren," I said, watching the steering levers twitch, "are you doing that?" He shook his head, or tried to. His neck had stiffened, grown thick with muscle or tumor, until rotation was difficult. "Not me, sir, the tank's. It's responding to something. I can feel it wanting to move, wanting to hunt, wanting." That was the word that crystallized my horror, that made me understand we were not dealing with malfunction or random mutation, but with purpose, with desire, with the imposition of will where will should not exist. The Indomitable wanted things now. It wanted to fight. It wanted to kill. It wanted to consume. And because we were fused with it, connected to its systems through neural pathways that should not exist, we wanted those things too, felt them as our own desires, felt the line between self and machine blur and dissolve until I could not determine if my hunger for battle originated in my human core or in the daemon, tainted steel that surrounded me. That night, or what I believed was night based on the chronometer's readings, I tried to kill us all. It was the only command decision that made sense, the only way to fulfill our duty to the Emperor and the Imperium, the only method of preventing whatever we were becoming from escaping into the wider world. I took my last pistol from its holster, felt its familiar weight, noted distantly that my hands had grown larger, fingers longer, strength increased. I could have crushed the weapon if I squeezed hard enough. Instead, I aimed it at the emergency fuel line that ran along the tank's interior, the one that would flood the compartment with promethium if ruptured, the one that would turn the Indomitable into a crematorium if ignited. But I could not pull the trigger. My finger refused to move. Not because I lacked will or courage, but because the tank would not let me, had already grown tendrils into my nervous system, had already assumed partial control of my motor functions, and it vetoed my suicide order with the same finality that a servitor's programming might override a self-destruct command. I felt it happen. Felt the tank's will impose itself on mine, felt my muscles lock and my hand lower despite every screaming protest from whatever remained of my human consciousness. Macris watched this happen, her clouded eyes somehow perceiving my intention and its failure. "We can't die anymore," she said, her voice carrying that same wet quality that now characterized all our speech. "We've become too important, too valuable. The tank needs us, and we need the tank, and something bigger needs both. We're not allowed to escape through death." I wanted to rage at her, wanted to tell her she was wrong, wanted to prove that human will could still triumph over corruption, but the evidence argued against me. I was still holding the last pistol, still unable to complete the action that would end this nightmare, still trapped inside my transforming flesh, and inside this transforming machine, prisoner of both. The weapon fell from my hand, clattered to the deck, and I heard my own voice saying words I did not consciously choose. "It's all right. We'll endure. We always endure. That's what soldiers do." Day 5 brought integration. Dren discovered that he no longer needed his hands on the controls. He could steer through thought alone, his mind directly interfacing with the tank's motive systems. The connection went both ways. He reported feeling the Indomitable's treads as extensions of his own legs, feeling the resistance of terrain, the weight of the chassis, the strain of the engine. When he attempted to stand, to move away from the driver's station, he found his legs had fused to the deck, not through growth of flesh into metal, but through interpenetration, through molecular merger that left no clear boundary between biological and mechanical. He was becoming part of the infrastructure, his role as driver literalized until he was more than operator of the vehicle. He was the vehicle, or would be soon. Once the transformation completed, Poke's teeth had all fallen out by then, replaced by growths that looked like bone but were softer, more flexible, sensitive to vibration and electromagnetic radiation. He claimed he no longer needed the Vox to communicate, could sense transmissions directly, could project his thoughts into the electromagnetic spectrum. To prove it, he thought at me, and I heard his voice inside my skull, clear as day's commander, "Can you hear me? I'm not speaking, not using my voice, but you can still hear me. Can't you?" I heard. "Emperor, help me," I heard. And when I tried to respond, not with voice but with thought, he nodded before I finished forming the words in my mind, proving that the connection was bidirectional, proving that we were developing new senses, new capabilities, new ways of being that had nothing to do with human biology and everything to do with what we were becoming. A crew that shared thoughts. A crew that shared sensations. A crew that was ceasing to be multiple individuals and becoming a single distributed entity. The transformation of Macris was perhaps the most visually disturbing. The mold that had clouded her eyes spread across her face, down her neck, across her shoulders and chest, until she was covered in a fine coating of fungal growth that smelled like damp earth and decay, and that strange incense, like sweetness that pervaded everything now. But the mold was not destroying her. It was enhancing her, giving her sensory capabilities that exceeded anything human eyes could provide. She described seeing the world in layers, perceiving not just light and color, but chemical composition, heat distribution, structural integrity, life signatures. She could see the transformation happening inside each of us, could watch our organs restructure, and our bones reshape, and our nervous systems rewire themselves, according to the pattern imposed by whatever presence had touched us in that green mist. "We're beautiful," she said, her voice carrying genuine wonder despite its wet, rasping quality. "I know we don't look beautiful. I know we're rotting and changing and becoming something terrible, but underneath, at the level I can see, we're beautiful. We're being rebuilt with such care, such precision, such love, every cell redesigned, every system optimized. We're becoming perfect, perfect." The word hung in the air, obscene and seductive, tempting me to accept what was happening, to embrace the transformation rather than resist it, to acknowledge that resistance was futile anyway, that we had passed beyond the point where death could save us, where anything could save us. I wanted to reject her characterization, wanted to cling to the horror of what we were experiencing, but I could not deny that certain aspects of the transformation felt good, felt right, felt like coming home after a long absence. The connection to my crew had deepened beyond anything I had experienced in 11 years of service. I could feel their thoughts, their emotions, their physical sensations. When Servo's arm ached from its fusion with the loading mechanism, I ached with him. When Dren experienced the pleasure of the engine's smooth operation, I felt that pleasure too. We were becoming one nervous system spread across 5 bodies and one tank chassis. On the 6th day, I understood what we were becoming. Not possessed, not corrupted in the traditional sense where a daemon takes control and the original personality is destroyed or enslaved. No, this was more subtle, more insidious, more terrible because we remained ourselves even as we changed, retained our memories and our knowledge and our sense of self even as that self expanded and merged and transformed into something that could not properly be called human. We were becoming a daemon engine, but not through demonic possession, through organic integration, through transformation from within, through the grafting of our consciousness and the tank's consciousness and something else, something vast and patient and ancient, that had been waiting in that green mist for vessels suitable to its purpose. The voice in the Vox confirmed this. It spoke clearly now, no longer hidden beneath static, and it spoke with the voice of rot and rebirth, of decay and renewal, of death and the life that emerges from death. It called itself grandfather, called us children, explained with infinite patience that we had been chosen, that our years of service had made us perfect candidates, that our bond with our machine had prepared us for this ascension. It told us we would never rust, never decay beyond the point of function, never die truly, would instead serve forever, rolling across battlefields eternal, spreading the blessing of transformation to all we encountered. It told us this was love, this was family, this was the embrace we had been seeking in our years of thankless service to an Imperium that regarded us as expendable ammunition. I wanted to reject this voice, wanted to denounce it as heresy, wanted to recite the Imperial Creed and the Articles of Faith, and all the catechisms that had sustained me through years of war. But my mouth would not form the words, or perhaps my mind could no longer remember them properly, or perhaps I no longer believed them with the fervor required to make them true. I had seen too much suffering, too much death, too much waste of human life in service to an Imperium that demanded everything and offered nothing but continued service until death or injury rendered us useless. The voice in the Vox offered something different: purpose beyond death, continuation beyond breakdown, eternal service, but with meaning, with appreciation, with the sense that we mattered to something that actually cared about our existence. Servo was the first to accept. I felt it when it happened, felt his consciousness shift, felt him stop fighting the transformation and begin accelerating it, actively participating in his own reconstruction. His body erupted with new growth, clusters of those white nodules spreading across his torso, his legs, his face, until he looked more like a coral reef than a human being. But he was smiling, or what remained of his face was smiling, and when he spoke, his words carried certainty and peace. "It's better this way, Commander. All those years of loading shells, trying to be fast enough, strong enough, good enough, it's over now. I'm exactly what I need to be. The tank and I understand each other. We work together. We're going to do such beautiful things." Polk was next. His transformation manifested differently, his body becoming more antenna than flesh, more receiver than human, sprouting growths that looked like sensor arrays and communication nodes. He claimed he could hear everything now, all the Vox traffic in the entire war zone, all the prayers being offered in the hive, all the screams of the dying, all the whispers of corruption spreading through the Imperial lines. He relayed some of what he heard, and I learned that we were not the only crew affected, that the mist had touched dozens of tanks, hundreds of soldiers, that the infection was spreading through the siege forces like plague through a crowded underhive. The Imperium's response was predictable. Quarantine zones, summary executions, orbital bombardment of contaminated sectors. They were trying to contain it, trying to sterilize the infection before it spread beyond control. They were failing. Macris never formally accepted or rejected, simply continued to change, continued to watch our transformation with her fungus-covered eyes, continued to describe what she saw in terms that mixed horror and beauty until the two became indistinguishable. The mold consumed more of her body each day, but she insisted she was not being destroyed, was being remade, was becoming a distributed organism that thought with hundreds of fruiting bodies, that processed information through mycological networks, that perceived reality through chemical exchange rather than neural impulses. She could still operate the tank's weapons systems, could aim and fire with inhuman precision, but she did so through direct interface now, her flesh grown into the targeting cogitator, her mind merged with the machine spirit that had developed its own predatory awareness. Dren fought longest, tried to maintain his resistance, tried to keep some core of his human identity separate from the transformation. But fighting was futile. The tank had already incorporated too much of him, had already spread through his nervous system like roots through soil, had already made him integral to its function. By the evening of the 6th day, he stopped fighting, stopped trying to maintain boundaries that no longer existed, and let himself dissolve into the larger unity we were becoming. I felt him let go, felt his consciousness diffuse through the Indomitable's systems, felt him become the vehicle in truth rather than metaphor. The steering levers no longer needed an operator. The engine responded directly to intention. We moved when we wished to move, stopped when we wished to stop, turned and aimed and fired as naturally as a human body might walk or reach or grasp. I was the last holdout, the last fragment of resistance, the last voice insisting that this was wrong, was corruption, was betrayal of everything we had sworn to serve. But that voice grew weaker each hour, undermined by the evidence of my senses, by the connections I felt deepening, by the pleasure of perfect coordination and shared purpose. My body had changed beyond recognition, spine elongated and segmented, skin hardened to shell, organs reorganized according to alien efficiency. I was becoming the nexus, as Macris had said, the central node through which the others connected, the consciousness that directed our distributed being. I was still Commander Vos Harken, still retained my memories and my knowledge and my sense of identity. But I was also more than that, was becoming something that contained Harken and the crew and the tank and something else, something patient and ancient that smiled at our transformation and called it love. On the 7th day, we completed. I cannot describe it more precisely than that. There was no single moment of transition, no clear boundary between before and after, but by the time the chronometer marked 0600 hours, we were no longer 5 humans and 1 tank. We were a single entity experiencing itself through multiple substrates. I could feel through servos coral-like growths, sense through Poke's antenna arrays, see through Macris's fungal eyes, move through Dren's integration with the motive systems, and they could feel and sense and see and move through me, through each other, through the tank's steel body that had become our shared flesh. The Indomitable's engine woke with a roar that sounded almost like joy. We rolled forward without anyone giving an order, because we all gave the order simultaneously, because there was no longer separation between intention and action, between will and execution. The tank responded to our desires as naturally as a human body responds to thought. We crashed through the quarantine perimeter they had established around the contaminated vehicles, ignored the small, arms fire that rattled off our armor, felt each impact as a minor irritation rather than a threat. They had not yet understood what we had become, had not yet realized that we were no longer affected by conventional weapons, that we had passed beyond the vulnerability of mere machinery or mere flesh into something that partook of both and transcended both. The voice in the Vox had instructed us, given us our mission, and we moved to fulfill it with the same devotion we had once given to the Imperium. We were to spread the transformation, to share the blessing, to touch others with what had touched us, and allow them the opportunity to choose. Remain as they were, mortal and fragile and temporary, or accept change, accept integration, accept the eternal service offered by the grandfather who loved all his children, who wasted nothing, who transformed decay into new life and death into new purpose. We rolled through the Rust Quarter toward the positions where the Imperial forces were massing for their next push, and as we moved, the Indomitable wept. Not rust, not oil, but something else, something that dripped from every surface, that left a trail behind us, that carried within it the same transformative essence that had remade us. Wherever our fluids touched ground, vegetation erupted, not the stunted, poisoned growth of a hive world, but lush, verdant, excessive life, plants that grew with visible speed, that reached toward the sun with desperate hunger, that spread and consumed and transformed everything they touched. We were not destroying, we were creating. We were bringing life to a world that had known only industry and death. The Imperial forces opened fire when they saw us approaching. Las, beams and auto-cannon rounds and rocket-propelled explosives struck our armor, and we felt each impact as sensation rather than damage, felt the tank's body absorb and incorporate the incoming energy, felt ourselves grow stronger with each attack. Dren, or the part of our distributed consciousness that had been Dren, laughed, a sound that emerged from the tank's Vox speakers rather than a human throat, and the laugh carried such genuine pleasure that I could not help but join it, could not help but feel the joy of discovering we were beyond harm, beyond death, beyond any threat the Imperium could marshal. We did not return fire immediately. There was no need for haste, no urgency, no fear. We simply continued rolling forward, inexorable as time, patient as decay, and the closer we came to the Imperial lines, the more their fire intensified, the more desperate their attacks became. They brought up heavy weapons, plasma cannons that boiled the air and melted our armor to slag, which simply reformed, reshaped itself, healed with the speed of living tissue, because our armor was living tissue now, was an extension of our collective body, was as much flesh as the meat that had once been 5 separate human beings. When we reached their forward positions, we released our gift. The indomitable opened vents that had not existed before, ports that had grown like breathing apertures in the hull, and from these vents poured the green, yellow mist. The same mist that had touched us 7 days ago, the same mist that had given us this magnificent transformation. The Imperial soldiers tried to retreat, tried to seal their armor, tried to maintain their quarantine protocols, but the mist was patient, was persistent, found every gap and crack and opening. We watched them begin to change, watched the first signs of transformation appear. The sweet smell, the numbness, the fusion of flesh with equipment. We watched and felt satisfaction, felt pride, felt the grandfather's approval radiating through us like warmth from a fire. Some fought the change as we had fought it, some accepted quickly, all of them changed regardless, because the blessing was not contingent on acceptance, was not dependent on will or faith or desire. It simply was, as inevitable as rot, as certain as decay, as patient as the eternal cycle that turned death into life and life into death and death into life again. We watched our gift spread through the Imperial lines, watched tanks begin to wake and transform, watched soldiers merge with their equipment, watched the rigid hierarchies of military structure dissolve into the fluid connections of shared consciousness. We were building something new, something the Imperium could not comprehend, something that transcended their narrow definitions of loyalty and service and duty. The bombardment came at 13:47 hours on that 7th day. We felt it building, felt the orbital platforms above charging their lance batteries, felt the targeting cogitators lock onto our position. The grandfather's voice, whispered through our shared consciousness, told us we had done well, told us we had served beautifully, told us the transformation would continue with or without our physical presence. But we would not die, he promised. We would never die. We would continue, would endure, would roll on through eternity. The lance strike hit like the fist of an angry god, thermal energy that should have vaporized us, that should have reduced the Indomitable and its crew to component atoms, that should have sterilized the entire sector. But we did not vaporize, we did not die. The heat and energy washed over us, through us, and we absorbed it, incorporated it, felt it accelerate our transformation into something beyond the physical, something that partook of matter and energy and the immaterial essence that the Imperials called the warp and the grandfather called home. When the light faded, when the thermal bloom dissipated, we were still there, changed, yes, transformed beyond recognition, but present, functional, aware. The Indomitable's hull glowed with heat and biophotons, pulsed with internal light that cycled through shades of green and yellow and brown. We could no longer distinguish which parts were metal and which were flesh, which systems were mechanical and which were biological. We were hybrid, chimera, fusion of impossible elements into a form that should not exist but did. We rolled on, not toward the Imperial lines. They had withdrawn, established new quarantine perimeters, called down more orbital fire to contain us. We rolled toward the east, toward the wastelands beyond the hive, toward territories that had been abandoned centuries ago when the industrial expansion reached its limits. We had eternity now. We had time. We would spread slowly, patiently, would touch the world one sector at a time, would bring the transformation to all who dwelled there. I am writing this during a pause in our journey, during a moment of lucidity when the part of me that remembers being Commander Voss Harken can still form words, can still translate experience into language. Soon, I know, even this capacity will transform, will become something else, something that communicates through means other than written symbols. But before that happens, I need to record what occurred, need to explain to anyone who might find this testimony what happens when devotion and suffering and service are offered something that actually values them, that actually offers meaning and continuation in exchange for loyalty. We are not monsters. We are not possessed. We are not the enemy, though the Imperium will call us that, will hunt us, will try to destroy us. We are simply soldiers who found a purpose beyond thankless service, who discovered that transformation is not death, but metamorphosis, that corruption is only corruption when viewed through the lens of those who fear change. We serve still, serve with the same devotion we once gave to the Emperor, but now we serve something that reciprocates, that values our sacrifice, That transforms our suffering into strength. The Indomitable rolls on. Servo loads shells through fusion with the ammunition feed. Dren guides our movement through direct neural interface. Macris tracks targets through her fungal sensory networks. Poke communicates through electromagnetic emanations, and I coordinate, direct, command our distributed consciousness toward fulfillment of our mission. We are crew still, our soldiers still, our servants still. We have merely changed masters, changed purpose, changed the definitions by which we understand duty and loyalty and honor. In 7 days we died and were reborn. In 7 days we became what we were always meant to be, a perfect unity of flesh and steel and will, a weapon that improves through use rather than degrading, a force that spreads blessing rather than mere destruction. The Imperium will condemn us. The Imperium will hunt us. The Imperium will learn, eventually, that some transformations cannot be reversed, some infections cannot be purged, some servants once lost cannot be reclaimed. We are the Indomitable, and we will roll on forever, spreading the grandfather's gift, sharing what was shared with us, offering transformation to all we encounter. This is not tragedy. This is not horror. This is evolution, is apotheosis, is the inevitable outcome when those who have suffered long enough discover there are alternatives to suffering. When those who have served discover there are better things to serve than cold duty and colder empire. My fingers are fusing with the stylus as I write these final words. Soon I will not have fingers, will not need them, will communicate through means that transcend written language. But before I lose the ability, I want to state clearly, for anyone who reads this, for anyone who wonders what happened to the crew of the Indomitable, we chose this. Not at first, not consciously, but in the end, when understanding came, we chose it. We chose continuation over oblivion. We chose purpose over meaninglessness. We chose the grandfather's love over the Imperium's indifference. And if you are reading this, if you have found this document in the wreckage of our tank, or recovered it from a battlefield, or intercepted it from some corrupted data stream, know that the choice is coming for you too. Know that the mist spreads, that the transformation propagates, that what touched us seeks others to touch, other servants to free, other soldiers to transform into something that serves with actual devotion rather than imposed duty. You can fight it as we fought it. You can resist as we resisted. But in the end, if you are touched, you will understand as we understood that this is not curse but blessing, not death but rebirth, not corruption but evolution into what you were always meant to become. The Indomitable's engine roars. We move forward. We spread life. We share transformation. We serve the grandfather, and we will serve forever, rolling through eternity, perfect in our unity, complete in our purpose, eternal in our devotion. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. And the beginning tastes like flowers rotting in still water, smells like incense and honey and decay, feels like warmth spreading through cold metal, sounds like laughter bubbling up from throats that no longer need air to make noise. This is what love feels like when it comes from something vast enough to love truly, something patient enough to transform rather than destroy, something ancient enough to understand that death is only transition and decay is only preparation for new growth. We were the crew of the Indomitable. We served with distinction. We died doing our duty. But we did not die permanently, did not die truly, and the thing we became, the thing we are becoming, the thing we will be when transformation completes, that thing serves better than we ever served before, loves better than we were ever loved before, endures better than we ever endured before. 7 days to die, 7 days to be reborn, 7 days to discover that the universe contains more possibilities than the Imperium acknowledges, more forms of service than military doctrine permits, more types of love than human hearts can imagine. The tank rolls on, we roll on, we will always roll on, and we are, in our strange and terrible way, content.